Thank you so much, Eric, for being here today. And as I have called you in my household, Professor Eric, thank you so much. I'm passing over the mic to you so you get to run the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this is one of those, we get to the flip you're always on the person asking questions, and I get to kind of to drive today.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me on your show. And I guess to maybe like sort of, start the show here a little bit is, you know, maybe how did you ever first hear that there's this guy named Professor Eric that you should talk to? I don't know if I ever asked you that question, but I remember, so we chatted, it was probably around April, I think is when it
Yeah.
was around April. So about 7 or 8 months ago is when we first chatted. And here
Mhm.
we are, on the verge of kind of going public with this crazy adventure you've been on. But what was the spark that basically said now is the time in your life that you are ready to tackle this major life milestone that 98.5% of people that start will fail, and you're on track to be in that 1%. So what was the spark that said 2022 is the year you're going to get this book started?
Right. Oh gosh, I'm excited to share this story with you because it was so, it was such a big one, right? So I have had, like you said, most people have like, oh, I'll write a book one day, like on a list somewhere, right? Just somewhere. And I did not have it as part of this year at all. Like it was
Mhm.
not part of this year. But I actually interviewed two people who went through the program on my podcast just by happenstance almost of like, I met one person and I was like, "Oh, so cool that you have this book coming out." And she had a phenomenal marketing plan. So I was like, "I've got to have you on the podcast." She then introduced me to another one of your authors. But then I was like, "Okay." By the end of that second call, I was like, I feel like something is saying, like,
Yeah.
Amanda, you should look into this. And so that same day, I looked, and sure enough, there's a cohort, like, applications are here. So I was like, you know what? I'll just put my name in and just see what happens. And sure enough, I get this message that says, I don't know how many days or weeks later, like, congratulations, you've made it to the next round. Now you need to have a conversation with Eric. And I was like, oh, well, this is a
This
big
sounds
deal.
fancy.
Yeah. And so sure enough, he called that morning and it was so nice. And this is the part that I'm really excited to share with you is that you had such an influence on that moment, which I'm sure a lot of your authors have the same experience. I came into it being such a structured person, so planned out. I was like, I have this many podcast episodes we can pull from. I have this many blog posts. I have this many YouTube videos. And you were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And your like just quickness was like, Amanda, your homework is now to stop looking at your own content, stop producing content, whatever you need to do to consume other people's content. And I was
Yep.
like,
Yep.
what? And
Yeah.
it threw me for such a loop. And I walked out of this room, went and talked to my husband, and I said, he's the person to coach me on this. He didn't even wait for me to say anything. Like, I need that in
Yeah.
my life. And so you were the perfect coach, and I knew it right away.
Yeah, well, I think what's so interesting too, and again, I think it's a very common thing, and this is just we're going to go inside baseball here because I think that's what's interesting for people is I think that a lot of us are that we believe in our minds that you write a book to demonstrate your knowledge, and I think that's what most people do, and I think your feedback of I'm going to come and share all this stuff that I need to just take out of my brain and put into a book, and that's about what I'd say probably 90% of people that I meet come into this one is they may have a table of contents, they may have written a proposal behind it. But this idea, oftentimes, of thinking that what's in your brain you put out there is actually the exact opposite. What's really interesting is I think what you really want to think about is a book is the most incredible experience and process to go learn something. And I'll share with you a really interesting story where I mean, I've been thinking this way for a while because I started, working with undergrads early on who didn't have this knowledge to begin. So we had to figure out like how do you gather knowledge. But there was an interview that Malcolm Gladwell, or a speech that he gave, and obviously we know Malcolm is like the best-selling author, like really, really pushing the envelope of things. And he was at Harvard, and he was giving an interview about his process about writing, and a very plucky undergrad raised the hand and said, "So, like, how do you become an expert in all these things to write the book about it?" And Malcolm, in his very Malcolm-y way, like smiled at him and said, "That's not how you write a book." And the person was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, It's basically you figure out like what you don't know and you're curious about, and you go find really smart people to learn from, and you learn
Mhm.
information, and you kind of share what you're learning on the way to help other people learn those things. But it's not what you know that makes it for a great book, it's what you can learn. And I think that's where a lot of times people mistake as they think about those things. And I think even from your standpoint, and maybe we'll go into it a little bit, is I think you came in with sort of a perspective of what you wanted this book to be. Like, tell us what the original
Mhm.
thesis that you came in with is. It wasn't a firm thesis, but you kind of had like a, here's where I think this book is going to go.
Yeah, I think, going into it, here I am. I've built this business on helping people learn marketing
Mhm,
and very accessible and what feels right for you. Like it doesn't have to be sleazy. We're not into crappy marketing. Like that's the
mhm.
whole thing that I'm teaching, right? So I assumed I would be writing about marketing.
Yep,
I mean, straight up, that's what I do every single day. And I
yep.
coach people through the process of figuring out what marketing works for them and trying it and all the roadblocks. And the book is not about marketing.
No, no. Well, and we'll go into like
Yeah.
kind of, and I want to get into what it's about in just a second here. But
Yeah.
so there's an important thing, and there's a question that I like to ask authors that I ask you. I see the
Mhm.
exact same question. I'm gonna basically we're gonna re-role play this again because I think it will help give context, not behind like what the book is, but why the book is. Because this is important. I think a
Mm.
lot of times people get into this thinking like, I need to figure out what the book's about, and I want you to figure out why the book is about. So I always ask the question, and I don't know if you'll remember exactly what you answered, but we'll kind of go through it a little bit. But my experience has been that books are tools, right? They're tools that are going to open doors for us.
Mhm.
And quite honestly, I always just want to make sure they're the right doors. Because if we do that right, the whole process is really, really fun. It doesn't feel like work, and you'll
Mhm.
finish. So for me, what I always like to do is I like to think out 10 years from now. Like you're already where you are, but I want to think about 10 years from now. What are things you would love to get to do more of, like every day in like a best case scenario? Not like what your
Mhm.
goals are, what your plan is, but what activities would you like to do more of? And I remember like our conversation, there was a
Mhm.
pause when I asked you that one because you thought to yourself, and the first thing you sort of I think answered was, well, here's what the book's about. I was like, no, 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 not what the book's about. I want to know what you want to
Yeah.
do. So maybe replay for your audience, what were some of the things that you thought about in those early days about like why, what you want to do more of down the road?
Oh, it's so good. And I really appreciate the call out of the long pause because there was a straight up long pause there. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh snap, I don't even know. Like there was that moment of I'm not sure. But then if I am remembering correctly, I remember saying to you, which was the first time I had really said this of like, I really hope I'm inspiring more people to chase their
Yes.
dreams.
Hmm.
Of like, again, nothing about marketing, right?
Hmm.
Marketing is the tool that gets you there. It's not what I was hoping for. And I remember thinking, I hope I'm inspiring more people.
Hmm.
And that was the moment that I thought, oh my gosh, am I trying to be a motivational speaker? Like is this something that's shifting in me a little bit? And oh my gosh, do I want to stand on stages? What doors do I want it to open? And that was so important. And I don't necessarily have all of the answers standing here talking to you today,
Hmm.
but I have more of them,
Right.
right? Because it's
Right.
been 6 or 7 or however many months it's been.
Yeah. Feels like a lifetime,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Feels like a lot of walks. Like I take
Yeah.
walks every day, often with my husband. And so we would talk about this because you asked me this question.
Yeah.
And I haven't told anyone at this point except
Right.
for my husband that I'm doing this. And he was like, well, what doors do you want it to open? And so
Hmm.
it's come up so many times. And I've just thought, like, what a great question that is. And it has seriously guided every decision in the book writing process.
Yeah, and I think what's so important about it too is the other thing just about it is, I think every author that I meet with, yourself included, I mean, you're very accomplished, you've had all these successes, you've made it to certain levels, is that we always have doubts about like, can I finish the book?
Mhm.
And is it going to be the book I want behind it? And I think part of the reason for that is we oftentimes think about books that are what I would describe as should books versus
Mm.
get to books. And the difference is really a meaningful one, right? Should books very rarely get finished. Like when we study the data of it, people feel like they should tell their family story, or people feel like they should write a book that's aligned to their business. But get to books are ones that you feel like, well, I can't believe I'm getting to make time for this one to do those things behind
Yeah.
it. And it's an interesting dichotomy. So how did you navigate that one? Because I think I remember some of the notes that I've reviewed before this one is that there was a little bit of like a, well, should I do a book about marketing? Like, I think
Hmm.
that maybe is aligned to it. Like, and how did you wrestle through that idea of the should versus the maybe I should think about what I get to?
Oh, Gosh, yes, that is such a good question. I think that there'll be moments throughout the rest of the process that I still think, should I have,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
in that, and where it comes up for me with the should is, well, I've built this audience
Yes.
that is going to expect this one thing. And are they going to be disappointed, right? Like, is it
Mhm.
not what they thought I would write if I wrote a book, or what they're looking for, or and that's where it comes into play. But you sharing that should versus I get to, I can say with 100% confidence that I have felt like I get to write this book
Yeah. Yeah.
every step of the way, because I have followed that even through that doubt. So you asked about how did I wrestle with that? Well, it was writing.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes I had, like, there were a few times I'm remembering right now of, like, I had this chapter, like, in the original table of not really table of contents, but like the map or whatever.
Yeah.
And I had it and I was like, "No, I don't want to write about that." Like, I realized, like, I don't
Yeah.
actually want to. And there was an interesting thing that happened in our family dynamics along at the same time. So I wasn't sure if it was gonna be able to finish at the time, because I stepped into a new role in the family of, we were caretaking for a family member.
Mhm.
And that moment actually shifted a lot, because
Mm.
I had a moment where it was like, well, everything in my business has to take a pause.
Right.
Not a full one. Like, everyone's like, what? You shut down your business? No, I didn't. Everything actually kept going. And I was really proud of the fact that I had built a business that allowed me to do that. But I did have a moment where I was like, well, family always comes first.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, if everything shut down, what would I do?
Mm.
And the answer is, I would write the book that I'm writing right now.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? When it's one of the things people ask me a lot about, like, well, what's your role in things? A lot of what I find is my role is permissioning, right? It's
Mm,
permissioning you, and it's not even sort of, I would say, permissioning you to do something, but I think for a lot of authors, they need permission to explore something. And one of the biggest things that I think is and I love the fact that we're not telling your audience what your book is about yet, because I think it's going to be so great that when they're here.
yeah.
But I think what's interesting about it is, like, great books typically connect dots, right? That's what they do. They're connecting
Mhm.
of dots. And I think a lot of people haven't collected enough dots in order to connect them. And so part
Mm,
of what, your sort of process was, is you had this inkling, right? You had this, like, feeling behind it, but you kind of then had to go out and sort of validate that inkling a little bit. So I remember, as you said, sort of hinted at earlier, I gave you a little bit of homework. And the homework
mhm.
is like, don't look inward, look outward, go out and start to discover and explore. And I think one of the things that I urge you to do is go see if you could find other people telling their stories that inspire you, that remind you of yours, that you want to sort of maybe share with other people. Do you remember in those first few weeks of that exploration process, any particular sort of pieces of content or things that
Mhm.
you heard, or talks or TED Talks, that inspired you to start to, like, go down some of these rabbit holes?
Yeah, gosh, I feel like the cool part is that everything is documented in this, of like, I've got a Google Doc or a Quip Doc that's like, here are a crap ton of links to TED Talks and interviews and that sort of thing. So I could go back and actually see them, but of course, like, the ones that really are sticking out in my mind right at this very moment are like Brene Brown
Yeah.
and Mel Robbins. And
Yeah.
I am in no way, shape, or form comparing myself to these two amazing women. But I found myself just really gravitating towards the way in which they were talking about things and how real they were. And I thought,
Mhm.
that that is how I believe that I do my best to show up in that way all the time and share what I can, and inspire in that way of like, yeah, this sucks really bad today, but
Mhm.
here's how we work through these things. Or And that's where I really found, like, okay, I'm feeling this pull a little bit more
Mhm.
that way.
Yeah. And just to sort of to say it out loud here is, Brene Brown and Mel Robbins weren't Brene Brown and Mel Robbins until, at the very beginning, right?
Right.
So none of us, and I think part of it is, like, none of us should compare ourselves to anyone. We should be inspired by and
Mhm.
motivated by, but comparing ourselves to anyone is not good for anyone, right? Like,
No.
unless if you want to feel great about yourself, like, you can find ways to compare yourself to others. But I think part of it is being inspired by those stories as opposed to people,
Mhm.
right? I think that's the bigger thing you said, the way that they interacted with those people.
Mhm.
So I think, so obviously, I think as you're going through this process, right? And I think it's for a lot of people, when they start that process, it does feel a little bit, especially, you were a self-described someone who's like, structure,
Yeah.
got things going on behind it, and you've got these other things going on in life behind it. One of the hard parts about when you start a book is you sort of pull some of those pieces away. We pull
Hmm.
structure away and we say, we want you to tap into it. And I think, as I sort of shared with you a little bit, there's really writing a book is very hard for two big reasons, or two reasons in particular, because you have to be great at two very disparate things. You have to do something called divergent thinking, which is this idea
Hmm.
of expanding upon things, growing, brainstorming, and then this convergent thinking, which is connecting dots in those pieces and places behind it. And so early on, the idea is like, just go explore. How do you balance that idea of, when you're such a sort of like disciplined, structured, running out of time, to kind of, you talk about going on walks and things. How did you give yourself space to explore? Because I think that's something that not everyone gets or really does
Hmm.
well early on in any kind of creative pursuit.
Right. Well, I think two things happened. One, I joined the best program for me that I could have ever found. Period. End of story. Joining the program was like, gosh, the more I talk about it and the more that I will be talking about it, it is like, find what works for you, and this is what worked for me. So, and I think part of it was because of the structure. Even though there's lack of structure with writing, there is very much structure with the program.
Yeah.
So I felt like that safety and that security of like, it's okay as long as I listen to their directions, and I'm a really good direction follower, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I was like, if I listen to their directions, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I'll be fine. And so that was good. The other part was, I laugh now thinking about this, because at first I was like, okay, Wednesdays are going to be my days to write.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm so structured, and I was like, okay, Wednesdays are typically my podcast day. So I was like, I'll just shift things, and that's going to be the writing day, and I'll do it in the morning because I love the mornings, and I'm more creative in the mornings. Eric, that there is in no way, shape, or form that's what happened. And I ended
Yeah.
up writing so much more at night than I ever could imagine that I would have. Things changed in life
Right.
and in business.
Right.
And so I just was like, you know what? Here I am. And so the two things are like, there was a structure of some sort of like,
Yeah.
you've got some deadlines in place. There were people, rallying around me, including yourself, that helped me through that, which is what I needed more than I could have ever known. But I tried really hard to use structure, and then the structure went out the dang
Yeah.
window, which was uncomfortable, but I somehow went with it.
Yeah. Well, and I think and I think what I would, if I'll play back to you, having observed it, is the reason you went for it is because you are doing a got to, not a should, right? The
Mm,
reason that, and I think that's, again, it's hard to sort of see when you're in it, but part of it is because of the fact that you're like, well, this is important, so I'm going to figure out a way to make it work. And
mhm,
I think that's really what happens when you start a new process like this. Is you're really, what you're doing is you're designing a new habit, right? That's really
mhm,
what this is. And so part of the hard part is like, well, it's hard to make things new, right? And so when you design the new habit, you kind of have to try and test things, experiment, and then you kind of get to it. And again, as we were
mhm.
just talking about earlier here, like, eventually you figure out your flow and your system, and it kind of hits for you a little bit behind it. So I wanted to maybe kind of, again, go one step further here a little bit.
Mm,
So obviously, this thing about writing a book, you have to actually write. And
yes.
you talked about kind of writing as you started doing that one. What was a little surprising to you about the process of writing? Because I think most people have this, vision of, a book starts
Mhm.
at page one and you keep writing until you get to
Yeah.
page 300. And your process, like most authors' processes, and all
Mhm.
folks in this process, is a little less, we'll call it linear. So, how was the writing process for you to kind of discover as you wrote?
Oh gosh, I'm remembering back to so many of those calls that I that you were like, this is gonna happen and it's okay, and this is gonna happen next. So get ready for that. And that was really helpful. But I think the most surprising thing for me was that you didn't start with a chapter. You didn't
Yeah,
start like that. To me was mind boggling
yeah,
at first. And then I was like, and then I remember hearing like, oh, when you submit your like a chapter to your editor, it can be any chapter. And I was like, what the, I can start in the middle. Like,
yeah,
my brain could not quite get there. But then it was because of the structure of this program that really worked. It was like we're starting with stories and I was writing stories. And the chapter that I wrote first, which is not chapter one,
Hmm.
is the strongest chapter in my opinion right
Yeah.
now. And I'm like, dang, like I started out strong with that. Not that it's perfect in any way, but
Hmm.
it really does feel like the most the strongest at the moment. And I think it's all coming back to that sentence of I wrote what I wanted to write.
That's
I
right.
didn't write what someone told me to write.
Mhm.
I let that go. And like you were so good about saying like it's going to be crappy, it's going to be ugly, it's going to be whatever. It doesn't need to be like it's not in any way shape or form going to be
Mhm.
perfect right now.
Yeah. And I think, and that's what I think is so fun about watching you is that like it's like going to the gym early on. It's like uncomfortable
Mm.
and like it just is like it's hard and your form is terrible. But it's really like, day one, you're not gonna start getting the results of it. Day two,
Mhm.
day three, but it's really like day 30 or 40 or 50 where you start to see those things. And even just like before it's called, kind of like looking at your pacing, like it
Mm.
escalated, right? Like it was kind of one of those things that like little bits of things, and then it's sort of like
Yeah.
you hit your groove and start going a little bit. And I think that's what's people are oftentimes surprised by about a book is that like I assume that it's this very linear process. I'm going to write chapter one and then
Yeah.
chapter two and chapter three. And it doesn't actually flow. It kind of escalates and it's
Mhm.
exponential in how it grows. So I guess then maybe let's like take that a little bit. So you start hitting your flow,
Mhm.
2-3 months into this one, and you start to
Yeah.
really like see where the topic is going a little bit. So there's this point where you kind of start to sit down and say, okay, I think now's the point where I want to write my introduction. And we always think about the
Mhm.
introduction as this kind of like writing the movie trailer for the book. So went back and just read yours beforehand, which was fun to do.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fun.
So I want to talk about like now we can maybe start to reveal a little bit about the
Mhm.
topic in the book a little bit here, but talk about that process for you of kind of like basically putting forward like I think this is how I want to
Mhm.
position the book, this is where I want to go behind it, and kind of writing that piece behind it. What was it like to write the introduction, and then maybe at that
Mm.
point we can share a little bit about like
What the
what
heck
it
the
is,
book's
and
book's
and
about?
maybe just I'm going to put this in the plug. I think you should ask Amanda to get a copy of her introduction in advance
Mm.
too. See, now I put the pressure on you right here.
Ah, I
So if
like it.
anyone's on this call, I'm gonna as Amanda's co-chair, I'm gonna say
Yes.
that Amanda, anyone who reaches out to you should send them your introduction so they can see what it is already here. So now
Okay.
I've put you on the spot.
I
So
love it.
like, oh, I wasn't planning on that.
You
There
know
you go.
what? I think it's great because,
Yes.
like, one of the things, and I promise I'll answer your question, one of the things that I have really become known for saying to my audience is done is better than perfect. I
Yes.
realize I'm not the first person to say that. Like, I'm not coining that by any means, but I say it all the time. And so this is me living that. Like,
Yeah.
I will send you the introduction that is not done. Like,
No,
in all, like, it is done, but it's definitely not perfect. So, sure, I'll
I love
whip
it.
that up in a PDF and yes.
And I think, and what I will tell back to your audience as well is the way it will become perfect is by help people
Mm,
sharing their thoughts to help and identify and offer those things. And that's what's great is that perfect doesn't happen individually. Perfect happens collectively.
yes.
So I always like to say is like, we
Mhm.
can get perfect. I can't get perfect. And that's kind of, I think
Ooh, I
what
love
your
that.
audience can help you do.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. That's so good. Okay, so introduction. I'm sitting here thinking, when did I write that? Okay. And the funny part is I remember where I was. I wrote in a lot of different places in my house and outside and so it was late at night and I happened to have some dedicated time where I could put my earbuds in. I was in bed and I was writing and I had this thought of like we really like to rush through things. Like I
Mhm.
wanted to be at the finish line of the book.
Mhm.
I want to be making more money in my business. I want
Mhm.
to be shaking hands with Brene Brown one day. These things we want. And I had this moment where I was like, but we really should be okay. Like should, right? We should be
Yeah.
okay with where we are. We should
Right.
just revel in that moment. And I am terrible at that. Let me be very clear. Like
Most ambitious people are, right? Most ambitious people are because you want to go to the next thing, right? You want to get to the
Mhm.
next milestone in this next stage. And it's it's why I think also that I think just important as you are in this process of like there is one thing that I think many people come to me saying is like, can I just go faster? And my point is, I think,
Hmm.
part of it, I think, is you do have to sort of like think of these as more like stair steps where you need to spend time in the stair and then take the leap over the
Mm.
next one along the way. And I think for this idea of that, really like the writing of the introduction, the positioning of the book is a stair step where you have to just be in it for a minute. And
Yep.
I think that's where, like, as you're writing this one, for most people, oftentimes the first version comes fairly quickly, but it
Hmm.
really takes a minute for them to cycle through at least one or two more times before they're like, okay, this is the movie trailer for my book. Like, and you'll have more changes along the way, but
Yeah.
that period is such an interesting one because it's sort of the first almost opening of the kimono of here's what it is in that way.
Hmm.
So how then you're in bed, you kind of
Yeah.
write this thing. What kind of is the process to sort of settle on, okay, I think this is where I'm going?
Yeah. Well, it took a lot of coaching, I feel like, along the way, because I I had this moment and I was like, you know what? And it was one of those like, this is good. I'm rolling with this kind of moments. And then the next day I read it and I was like, what? Like that really? Did you really think it was that good? Okay. So I'm sitting there and I was like, okay, I started to get to, and I wish I could remember the specific words that I was thinking at that time before I wrote what I landed on, right? Because it was like we were trying to rush through things. But everyone that's going to be reading this book is going to want to know all the answers because
Mhm.
everyone who comes to me for any type of marketing help and what ends up being business coaching is like, just give me the formula. Just tell me what to do.
Mhm.
And there isn't one. Spoiler
Right.
alert,
Yeah.
right?
Turns
Like,
out.
there's that.
Yeah.
If we had it, we would all be millionaires and live in the lavish lifestyle, whatever we wanted. And so here I was thinking, like, how do I connect with the person who's trying to rush through something?
Hmm.
And I'm writing about Lord knows what at this point. I don't even remember. And I remembered a story from my past.
Yeah.
And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, that's it. And so what came out on the other side was to be in awe of where you are, to be in
Hmm.
awe of the beginning. And that carries throughout the entire book of like being in awe of where you are, even in the sucky times,
Hmm.
which oddly enough carried me through writing the dang book
Yeah.
because there's a whole section that you tell us about of like the I suck phase.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, Amanda, you have to listen to your own words and be in awe of the sucking.
Yep. Yep. And the other thing I think is so interesting about this sort of for you is where you're in that period where it's it's funny, we call it the I suck phase because we feel about it,
Mhm.
but it really is this process of just like the I unlocking phase, right? And I think
Mm.
for you, like, and it almost happens with authors almost every time. So when I smiled, you some, or those listening to this won't know, I smiled right when you said I came back to a story. And I'll tell you, almost every time when people write their introduction and settle on the direction of their book, it either comes down to a personal story or a story of someone
Mm.
else that they heard. And it's almost every single time.
Hmm.
And it's sort of because stories are how we learn, but also how we build emotional connections to things. And so great books as yours is on pace to be, they always have two things. They have intellectual insights, but they also have an emotional thread. And so stories are those interesting points
Mhm.
behind it. And then what happens when you do that one is you actually start to, especially when you do well, you start to establish this new category that you have. And that's kind of what you're looking to do with this book, with this kind of like term you're sort of coining here, the accidental entrepreneur, right? And
Mhm.
so I think we're gonna reveal the content, the
Yes.
title in just a minute here. But the idea of this accidental entrepreneur that you sort of talked about being in awe of that one, how
Mhm.
did that become kind of your category that you would like to sort of define the support behind it? Because
Mhm.
it's you're designing a new category with this, which is also very, very scary, but also this
Mhm.
is what Brene and Mel did, right? So if you want to think about it parallels wise, right? Like Braving
Mhm.
the Wild is a new category, sort of this vulnerability stuff was a new category. High Five is a new category.
Mhm.
So how did accidental entrepreneur be your category? Why did you decide that's the area you want to build?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I love that. So, first and foremost, I feel like it's important to say, like, I got so excited when I thought of that term. Like, I said it. It was actually during one of the book calls.
No,
So,
really.
yes, we have this book call. We get in the breakout session, and I said, well, I'm talking to people who basically like stumble upon entrepreneurship, like they're an accidental entrepreneur. And someone was like, "Whoa, that's a good term." I was like, immediately, I was like, I told Michael, my husband, the other day, I was like, I think that the way you know if you're an entrepreneur is if by how many URLs you end up owning. Because
It's true.
immediately, immediately I went to the domain host or whatever, and I was like, accidental entrepreneur. Dang it, someone already owns that and I couldn't buy it, but I tried.
Yes,
And so
that's
I laugh so hard because we all have a lot.
yes. I have like 75 right now, and
I
I
know.
like, and every time they come to renew, I'm always like, I should just no,
Yes.
but I might one day, so I don't know. Yeah.
Same thing. Same
Yeah.
thing. I do the exact same thing. And I think we all do. So, anyways, I went quickly there. And so that was an interesting moment of like, I just said it. I just said,
Mhm.
oh, it was an accident. And the other part
And it's
is
important on that one. I just for everyone listening here too, it's
mhm,
important to know that the words you said, I said it. And I think that's one of the things that
mm,
people oftentimes the challenge with what's going on for a lot of us is we think these things, but we don't actually like communicate it. And so what you are actually doing here in this stage that we're talking about,
mhm,
right? This sort of
mhm,
positioning stage is you're verbalizing things. You're actually testing it. So part of
mhm,
it is that there's no such thing as a good idea or a bad idea. There's just an idea that works. And that works because you're testing it. So when you write something and you share it with people, that's testing it. When you
mhm,
talk about it and you verbalize it, that's testing it. And so part of what is hard for a lot of authors is they think that they just do this in silence and
mm,
then it comes out the other side. And to your point, like, and this is why I just want to put a really important point on it is that you were testing these things constantly from conversations, from walks, from writing, and that sort of stuff. And it's
mhm,
not that like at the beginning you knew these things, but you had some theses and you're testing, and then this clicks. And then that's where you kind of continue to go on it. So if you go back and we look at your writing, again, if we were
mhm.
to like go back, I bet we could look at that day that you hit that one and see the escalation of your
Uh,
writing almost to it. I mean, I didn't
I
look at
bet,
it for sure, but I
yeah.
bet we could predict that one because there's this sense of where you suddenly validated the work. And, you know, as
Mhm,
we talk about this idea of connecting dots, you had a bunch of dots. And then by
mhm.
testing the ways you connected them, suddenly it clicks. And that's where you find like clarity of where things go.
Yeah. I have no doubt that you are right on that because as soon as that happened, immediately I'm trying to buy URLs immediately. So I was like, that's it. That's the name. And then I was like, oh, on this thing. And then I was like, is that it? But it became part of the introduction, how I said, like, it was like, I'm writing this for you, someone who has stumbled into being a business owner.
Yep.
You've decided I'm going to do this thing. You're probably not even comfortable using the word entrepreneur at this
Mhm.
point, and spelling it is troublesome often as well. And so you are stumbling into this by accident. You
Mhm.
followed this passion. Maybe you have a boutique, maybe you have a yoga studio, maybe you know, you're a baker. Who knows what it is, but you have kind of stumbled into this. And and I think it was so cool when I had this moment of saying accidental. And then I was like, oh, yeah. It's like all of a sudden, when we think of something as an accident, we can give ourselves a lot of grace
Yeah.
around
Mhm.
it. And so, like,
Totally.
if I fall down on accident, I can be like, well, I won't do that again, but it happened.
Yeah.
What did I learn from that? Versus like when we're like, I'm going to do this thing very
Yeah.
purposefully,
Right.
it feels like so much more pressure.
Mhm, mhm. And I think, you know, so when you think about that, you sort of once you sort of coin this one, a lot of other stuff happens. You start getting those clarity, you start building those pieces behind it. How then from that did you start to settle into like, okay, now I see where this is going to go? And again, you
Mhm.
know, you're now at a point where you have a draft of this, even like a full draft of the book behind it.
Mhm.
It's this interesting thing here, right? Whereas, you know, you're drafting a manuscript
Mhm.
and yet it's a little bit like I'm still not sure it's totally done. So how do you give yourself the confidence, is an important
Mhm.
word that I use right there, to get from where this now I think I have like my category I'm going after to get
Mhm.
this first draft done, because the Amanda who's the perfectionist in you was like, well, now it's got to be great. So how do
Right.
you get from like I now believe that I've got something, some magic on my hands, and now I need to get something to, you
Mhm.
know, a book form hard, right? Because
Yeah.
it's still imperfect and it's very process.
Yeah, you know, and that's like where I'm right now. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to back up about mm, 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, I still didn't have a title. I
Yeah.
have not worried about the title at all. Like it
Mhm.
hasn't even been a thought of mine. I'll back up 5 years when I started my business. That would have paralyzed me. I
Mhm.
would have been paralyzed by that
Mhm.
for sure. By starting my business, I realized people buy outcomes, they don't buy titles of things. Like so much, you can just kind of let that go. So I wasn't worried about the title of the book until the video team was
Yep.
like, we're going to need a title
Yeah.
to work on this video. And I wrote in the thing, like, I haven't even thought about this yet. And
Yeah.
that's the title they were going to use. And I was like, no, 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 no. And the video team's like, we did not say that to you, but that's how it felt, right? Like, I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, they're going to use that. And so I was like, oh my gosh. And I went back. And so I'm honing in on the title here because that felt like the piece that would really bump it to like, oh, this is a real thing for
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
And I think until then I was like, it's just this thing. I just didn't put any pressure on myself around it
Hmm.
whatsoever.
And no
And
one else does, right? I think that's also important to know is I think one of the things that people do is they don't start because they're worried about, well, I don't know if this is the right title. I mean,
mhm,
you know, titles change an awful lot of times. Like,
yeah.
I actually like, tell people like you should have dozens of titles that you try and test behind
Mm,
it. And part of the opportunity for your audience here, just put in the plug here, is that Amanda's title that she's going to share with you is still a working title. It's not like
mhm.
this is the final thing. And so hopefully that if you want to participate in her book journey, you'll get a chance to vote on it, right? Like, I mean, so
Yeah.
that's what's really neat about it here too, is that like I think that titles are things that are it's just like the introduction. You had to like you had or that you had lots of ideas, and then as you start to share them, you'll see what resonates and pick it. And that's the best part here is that like we oftentimes sort of suffer in writing a book alone, and
Mhm,
you've intentionally chosen to suffer together, which is A,
mhm,
made the book come together faster, but B, I think also gives you ability to like make sure that this is a community behind the book. It's not my book, it's
mhm.
our book.
Yes, so much so. And it was really neat. Like I feel just so lucky that I was in this cohort at
Hmm.
this specific time. Number one, amazing people in it. Two,
Hmm.
you were also writing and producing the
Yeah,
book.
turned out,
So
yeah.
so that was really neat because here you are, you're teaching us all of these things. And I happened to engage on a social media post of yours
Hmm.
about your book.
Hmm.
And I'm genuinely really pumped to read your
Hmm.
book. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really exciting. Like, the topic is amazing. And I was super
You're
excited.
just saying that, Amanda.
No, really. I was
Yeah.
like, I was really excited. And
Yeah.
it was funny because someone asked on the call, like, can we buy it? And you put the link, and I actually had it as a task list, like one of my task things to like go buy the book. And it was like sitting on, hanging out there. And so I engaged on social media at some point,
Yeah.
and I don't know how many weeks later,
Hmm.
whenever it was, you followed through with something I didn't even know you were going to follow through with because it
Yeah.
wasn't even a promise at that point. You sent me a piece of the book, like,
Yeah. Well, I sent you the
all
whole book, actually. I
what
think I
you
sent you
did.
the whole one. Yeah.
I was like,
Well,
"Oh my gosh." And that again was to that point of like, we're in this together. You were such a great example as I was going through it that I was like, this is incredible. And that was the other reason why this program really worked for me is because the marketing is exciting. Like
right.
I love it.
Yep.
I'm such a marketer. Like that is my background, but I'm like, this is the way to do it.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
they have found the secret sauce and I think it's amazing. So that I can't remember why I went to that
Well, I think because we're
specifically, but
talking a
it
little
was
bit about we were starting to talk about how people get
mm,
involved in books, right? And
yes.
I think that's what's interesting here. And because I think the other part for the audience to sort of understand is, you get to the point where you finish a first draft and it's this amazing accomplishment, which again, kudos to you for finishing a
Mm,
first draft. But the other part about it now is that this just means that now you're in the game, right? Now you're in the
mm,
game of like literally making this a book. And the best books, and I think, I got this really great opportunity to interview Simon Sinek. And what he
huge.
said, yeah, huge, right? You almost have to be a huge fan of Simon just because of the way he thinks. But what he says is so interesting is he's like, great books are built on word of mouth. And the challenge
Mhm.
that too many books have is there are not enough mouths to be recommended. And so I
Right.
think what is important behind this one is that I think that if a book's going to be great, it can't be my idea. It has to be our idea. And I think
Mhm.
that's what's so interesting about like as a marketer and as someone who's building this book that, is an extension of your brand, but it's different, right? I think that
Mhm.
you are basically saying like, hey, I got to this point, but I'm going to need your help to get involved in the next point of it.
Right.
And so maybe as you talk about that a little bit here, so you're in this new phase of the book where it's kind of saying like, hey, be a part of this journey with me here. Come
Mm-hmm.
get involved in it. And I think your audience certainly has an opportunity to do that. Why is it like, or how do you sort of, again, get to the point where you say, I'm going to give you an early draft. I'm going to give you
Mm-hmm.
early cover designs. I'm going to give you early title designs and help me do it. How do you as an entrepreneur sort of get vulnerable in that way? And
Mm-hmm.
why, as a marketer, is it important to do that? Because they're two different things.
Oh
Entrepreneur
yeah.
terrified by, marketer excited by. So how do you think about that?
Ooh, that's really good. So the entrepreneur is just so scared of like, they're gonna not like it. Oh my gosh, this is gonna be terrible. All of that. And I think the way that I've gotten through it is support through the program. Like find your
Mhm.
people is a
Yep.
huge one. And you are my people, right? Like I found my people to help me get through this specific journey of mine of writing a book and getting it out there. And the other part is the the answer is no if you don't ask, is what I think a lot
Yeah.
of like,
Yeah.
and just so we're clear, I did ask to interview Mel Robbins. The answer was no, but it was a really freaking nice no.
Totally.
Like it
Right.
was awesome.
Yeah.
And so the answer is no if you don't
And I would
ask.
say I always say, so no is a different answer. It's actually not
Mhm.
yet. So I think
Yeah.
that's the other thing behind it is it's not that saying like, she's not saying block me from your number, don't ever email me again. She's just saying not
Right.
yet. Right. And so I think that's the other part of it is
Yeah.
like, listen, like down the road, you may be on the same stage as Mel and you guys will
Right.
hug, but it's not like a lot of these things are, no one's
Hmm.
like block you and never going to say you and say negative things, just not
Right.
yet. Right.
Right. So there was that. And then I think like that idea of like, if I don't put it out there, no one will get any benefit from it,
Yeah.
even if there's someone that thinks it sucks so bad. I
Hmm.
have to believe that my first draft of something will at least be okay for someone to be like, you know what? That was actually pretty funny, or that was pretty
Hmm.
neat what she said. And if someone is hating it, then they just don't need to read it anymore or vote on the cover
Yeah.
or, like that's the entrepreneur side of like, this is going to be scary. It absolutely is going to be scary when I put it in the hands of other people, but
Hmm.
I don't know until I do it.
Hmm.
Um, the marketer is like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest way to market this dang book. And I know it's going to get better.
Yeah.
Like that is one thing that I have learned through my entrepreneurship journey is everything is better if your dream student has input.
Yeah.
So if I can get something into the hands of someone else and say like, mark it up, tear
Yeah.
it apart. Let's rebuild it together. I know it'll be better. So I'm super pumped for that next phase
Mhm.
of it. Also scared for people to read my words.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what's so important, right? And I think the biggest thing I would sort of share, especially for your listeners, is I think that what sort of you'll get with Amanda's experience is not only like, I think to get access to the book, but I also think, and I'm just going to be candid here, like people who are ambitious want to write books, right? The stats are like 85% of
Hmm.
people want to do it. And I think what's important to know is, and I think not only the stuff you've been doing your podcast, but I will think, if you want to sort of see what it's like to be in that process, to vote on
Hmm.
covers of those things, you should, right? That's the best way to learn what this thing is like. And I think that's kind of what the entire book is about is accidental entrepreneurs. You just need to build a community around you to help other people to sort of support those
Hmm.
things. And so I think it's an important piece to know here is that, the philosophy that I've thought with writers for a long time is just never write alone, right? Like always
Hmm.
have people around you and those pieces and places. And I think that's what's like, I'm so excited for the next one is because I think what you're so good at doing naturally, and obviously it's something that you've learned to do well, but naturally as well, is that you teach, right? You teach with your words. And so I think part of it is like, as I sort of tried to do with my own work, you're going to do the same. Is like, let me teach you like what I learned, how it worked, and those
Hmm.
places. Because I think this book is not only to inspire more accidental entrepreneurs, but also more people who are accidental tellers of their stories, right? They're
Mm.
people who didn't intend to, but now they do.
Yeah.
Did we reveal the cover or the title, anyways? The working title? I don't think we've
Yeah.
done it
Let's do it.
yet. Okay.
So here is the title, which again, buy the book if you want to vote on this, because it could
Yeah.
be not the the
And the
the title.
cover and all those things, right? Like
Yeah.
these are all working titles, but it's a great. I like this one. Should certainly be in your fave 5 to vote on. So
Ooh, I'm
yeah,
glad you like it. So what I came up with was Uncover Your Confidence, an accidental entrepreneur's guide to success.
I love it. I love it.
I
And
was
what are
excited.
you? What do you think in terms of for someone who just to sort of as this sort of category you're talking about here, you're thinking about it. So, the neat part about it that I love is that entrepreneurship can be for lots of things, right? Like you're a
Hmm.
book entrepreneur as well as a business entrepreneur, as well as a podcast entrepreneur. All these things are, entrepreneurial. What is maybe your biggest piece about, like, where people's confidence is often hidden, who are thinking about pursuing some new thing that they want to do?
Yeah, one thing that I truly believe, like to my core, which I think I'm not necessarily saying I'm the first person to say this, but I don't hear it very often. I think people look outward for confidence, and
Mm,
I truly believe that we all have confidence within us. Because if we
mhm,
look back to our childhood and you like run and did something and never even cared about anything like what you were wearing or what you were trying, and you had the confidence in you, and oftentimes it gets buried. So that's why I chose Uncover, because I'm not here to give you confidence through this book. I'm here to help
mhm.
you uncover the confidence that's already there.
Love it. And I think, and I'll just put in another a quick plug, since, like, that's kind of what I get to do here. I just get, like,
Yeah.
it's your show and I just get to plug things. I do think one of the things that you've also, as you thought about this book, is that part of it is like, certainly the book is a tool, but another thing is that, like, you were even designing this to be able to do workshops and coaching and teaching
Hmm.
and speeches. So who are some of the people that you think will most benefit from this book, when they get in their hands, whether they're organizations or groups or individuals?
Hmm.
Like, who are the people that you are most hoping to get this in their hands to read, love, and explore?
Oh, that's so exciting. So, anyone who is doubting the fact that they can do it, very specifically, anyone who is like, I didn't go to business school, I can't run a
Mm,
business. That's
yep.
the person that typically is like showing up and saying, like, they just aren't doing the things that it's so much more simple than what we think it is. Business can be complicated, but to get one started, it's actually not that complicated. We make
Mhm.
it so complicated because we get in our heads. And so if anyone is struggling to do that and feeling like, can I don't have the education, because that's the biggest thing is like, I feel like I need to go back to school. Not that there's anything wrong with going to business school
Yeah.
at all, but a lot of people feel they need to do that. And I just don't believe that that needs to happen.
Mhm. And I think, there's some recent data saying something like 70+% of people right now would like to work for themselves one day, in whatever version
Mhm.
that is. And yet, I think we see that the numbers are tiny relative to that, like, especially for Gen Z right now, it's like 2%. And I think, to your point, that, like, sometimes people think of this as this binary, like, yes or no, but there's
Mhm.
also this, like, pathway towards sort of to do these things, whether you start taking on individual yoga clients or whether you start selling your things on Etsy behind it.
Mhm.
What are the other things, I guess, for this accidental entrepreneur? Like, what are some of the things that you see for people? Because I think the other part about confidence that you touch on in the book a little bit is that you sort of have to be self-aware of what could be
Mm.
sold, could be entrepreneured, or whatever we want to call it. But, like, there's part of this, like, self-discovery. What are the things that you advise people to do to find out what could help them scratch that itch of wanting to sort of
Mhm.
create something of their own?
Yeah, I think again, it goes back to just like taking one step. And oftentimes it's like, can you sell that, those cookies around the neighborhood? Can you
Yeah.
like really getting very specifically the way I share about it in the book and go into detail is like action leads to confidence.
Mm,
And so it leads to uncovering that confidence. And so
mhm.
a lot of people think, oh, and it's funny because I'm writing a book and I have a podcast. So many people read books and listen to podcasts and hope that they have confidence after listening or
Yeah,
reading.
yep, totally,
Not
totally.
the case.
Yeah.
The confidence comes through action. So it's really like taking action. And what I like to say is seemingly small action is
Mhm.
the thing that really is helpful.
Yeah. Debbie Millman, if you're familiar with her, she's
Mm.
amazing designer, but she sort of has said, coined the term, from a friend of hers, that you don't need more confidence, you need more courage. Those courage to take those small steps that build
Mhm.
confidence, but confidence is sort of, it's a byproduct, as opposed to, it's not the thing in and of itself behind it.
Mhm. Thank you so much for asking all of these great questions.
It's weird to be on the other side, isn't it? Like,
It is weird.
it's weird, but I will tell you, like, I just want to share that I think, what I so much have loved about your, like, watching you go through the process is just how you embrace it as a student to learn, but also, like, thinking about it as a teacher to teach. And I think that you're
Mm.
always thinking about, well, how could I share this with other people? And I think a lot of the interesting things about your book journey, are teachable, right? And that's what it is. And
Mm.
and for anyone who, thinks about it this way, this is another venture, right? A business is a book is a
Mhm.
business. And so it's, you're an accidental entrepreneur when you start writing a book. Either most people don't always realize that all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I feel like it, like starting something new, fumbling, not knowing what to do, finding my people to help support me for sure. So I definitely feel it.
Right.
So if someone is looking to also write a book, can
Yeah.
you talk about or just mention the program really quickly? And I promise I'll honor your time and get you out of here on
No,
time.
that's great. Listen, I think I mean, so first off, I love this. And as Amanda knows, this started out for me as a very much a weird passion project. I had a professor at Georgetown. I started teaching a class about entrepreneurship and quickly realized that I wasn't creating entrepreneurs. So I started forcing my students to write books, and very quickly realized that if you combine writing and entrepreneurship, you could produce some amazing things. So yeah, so I've been super privileged to work with amazing people like Amanda, and now I think I will. I think this last month I had my 1600th author published in the last 5 years, which is sort of
That's
crazy.
amazing.
Like 86 National Book Award winners or finalists in the last 2 years. So it's been really cool. But yeah, the best place is, so this is part of, we describe what we do as we're a platform for modern authors. So we really want to help modern authors today. And so the website is called Manuscripts, and that's where you can learn about the writing programs we do, the publishing programs, the book tour programs and those things, but just manuscripts.com. And it kind of has everything into it, including the writing program that Amanda's went through with me. And really just like, I think the most important thing is like our philosophy is just that like, modern authors should never write alone. And I think it just sort of, it is this thing that like so many people want to write books. Same with, entrepreneurship. People want to do it. It's just oftentimes you need a safe place to have that support. And so I've been super privileged because I feel like for me, I know how important my books were, and the fact that people like Amanda and others like trust me to be a part of their journey is a pretty amazing privilege that I certainly don't take lightly. So yeah, if anyone wants to just chat, or again, the programs are certainly one thing, but always just happy to help people figure out their compass. Because I think if you can help people figure out where they want to go with their book, it just all kinds of magics happened. But more importantly, congratulations on this part
Oh,
of your journey. And I'm super grateful to be a small part of it. Make sure that I get to be pre-order number, at least like the first 10. So make sure you send it to me early so I can be
yes.
one of your first pre-orderers when it comes out. And I'm excited to sort of see the next phase of your journey ahead.
Oh my gosh, thank you for everything. I feel like I can't say thank you enough. It's you say a small sliver of this journey. It's been huge. It's been huge. So thank you.
Thank you.